Okay. Censorship-Industrial complex. What is that? Well, I think we all are pretty familiar with it. Shout out to, again, Big Mad Crap, Greg. This is over at Racket News. Go support Matt Taibbi, Orf, and the whole crew over there. I don't know if Lee Fang is going to end up joining them. It seems like they're aligning pretty well. Matt and Lee are getting along.
He left the other place.
He did leave The Intercept. And it seems like TK News, Racket, TK, what used to be, now it's Racket News, is becoming a home for mainstream journalists that are now independent and need a place to publish and a platform. But Matt
Andrew Zigman, if you're listening, there's an opening for Raccoon News. You go with that. I'm just saying.
Matt decided, though, to do this whole thing with, and this has to do with the Twitter files. Censorship-Industrial complex is a thing that came out of the Twitter files. So let's get into. So this happened the other day. Matt dropped this. Oh, I didn't put what date. It was April 25th. So that was 5 days ago on Tuesday. Today you'll find 2 new Twitter files threads out, number 20 and 21. One of them by longtime Racket contributor Matt Orfala, and I got that from watching him. Orfalia. Orfalia. Yeah, we can do all kinds of
Orfale.
And another by Andrew Lowenthal, who worked for 18 years defending digital rights at Engage Media in Australia and watched activists in his space slowly be absorbed into by what we're now calling, quote, the censorship-industrial complex. 2 new threads collectively show the wide political range of revolutions in the Twitter files material, which have been slandered absurdly as a partisan exercise. Lowenthal, who in his Insider's Guide to Anti-Disinformation describes himself as a progressive-minded Australian, printed a series of exchanges between journalists who attended a summer quote-unquote tabletop exercise at the Aspen Institute about a hack and leak operation involving Burisma and Hunter Biden weeks before the actual event. Wonder how that happened. When the actual scandal broke not long after, the existence of that tabletop exercise clearly became newsworthy, but none of the journalists present, who included David Sanger of the New York Times and current Rolling Stone editor Noah Shachtman, said a word. Perhaps, as was common with anti-disinformation conferences, the event was off the record. We asked, and none of the reporters commented. It doesn't matter. Lowenthal showed how another, quote, anti-disinformation conference, unquote, featured the headline speaker Anthony Blinken. Yep, that's anti-disinformation. Yes, because he's putting out disinformation, so everything he says is bullshit. He's currently suspected of having triggered the infamous letter signed by 50 intelligence officers saying that the Hunter Biden laptop had the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. All right, as Lowenthal writes, quote, see how it works? The people accusing others of disinformation run the biggest disinformation campaigns themselves. This is straight Iraq war stuff. It's like we create a story, we leak it to an outlet, we then refer to them and say, look, they printed this story, must be true. On the flip side, Orf found a document showing that both WikiLeaks' account and that of Dr. Jill Stein were algorithmically added by Twitter to a list given by the creepy name is_Russian. This was one of 2 buckets of Russians Twitter was collecting. One called a priori Russians, usually accounts identified as Russian by third-party researchers like Hamilton 68.
Such as Hamilton 69.
Yep. The other, inferred Russians, which are accounts that had strong, medium, or weak signals of Russianness involving language, the type of email account, location of IP, tweet time, etc. Even Twitter's own analysts noted that any system that captured Jill Stein as Russian spoke to the overly broad nature of is_Russian. This was just such a signals or marker-based methodology that Twitter and other researchers used to identify Russians on the internet, a methodology Twitter internally called one of educated guesses, Russia, 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 concealing a company's secret about identifying accounts linked to Russia's IRA. We have no realistic way of knowing this on a Twitter-centric basis. Might have been important for them to tell us that at some point. Nah, they'd rather keep that in-house. So as Jill Stein
Yep.
noted when Matt spoke to her yesterday, the day before, these unseen algorithmic tweaks to the political landscape have the effect of decreasing the visibility of political independence during a time of record hunger for political alternatives, quote unquote. And she's right. Stein noted a Gallup poll had just showed identification with the Democratic and Republican parties is at an all-time low and said such digital meddling is, quote, an outrageous excuse for political repression and, quote, more that Joe McCarthy would be proud of, unquote. Yeah, can't disagree. I can't disagree with anything she's saying here. Shout out Jill Stein.
You could. You won't.
Right.
Because there's not much to.
When Stella Assange, or Stella Morris, was told about the is_Russian list, she first speculated that any algorithm that diverted users based on location might produce false positives if the account users used, say, a Tor browser, which could randomly result in an RU exit node. Since Tor is an essential tool for civil liberties and privacy communities, you could have people being tossed in a Russian bucket for the crime of trying to evade surveillance, which is why, by the way, the Restrict Act is trying to get rid of VPNs exactly for this reason.
Yes. Yep.
It's unfucking real. Makes me so angry. In another part of his thread,
Isn't it, though?
Orfale, or Matt, notes that a Clemson University researcher hailed as a troll hunter, quote unquote, in the press and used as a source by major media outlets speculated that an account used by @BRK Warlord was sharing a hashtag Bloomberg is racist because the account was tweeting at odd hours. So it had to be Russian, right?
At odd hours, huh?
That's the expert opinion. Orf just called them, who laughed and said, I'm a nurse at a hospital in Indiana, and in 2020, I worked the night shift. So literally posting at 3 in the morning regularly got you flagged for being a Russian. That means that Reef and I are both on a list because we're up late every night.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So whether it's suppression of a news story conservatives care about, like Hunter Biden laptop tail, or de-amplification of a left-leaning Green Party candidate like Jill Stein, the Twitter files consistently hit at the same theme, but it's not partisan. It's really summed up by something Stella said, the difference between WikiLeaks and the anti-disinformation facsimile Bellingcat. Quote, WikiLeaks coined intelligence agency of the people. Bellingcat went with for the people. Yeah, for the people and the government that represents them, not trying to expose the corruption and wrongdoing within those governments. Civil society institutions, the media, politicians, and the government are supposed to maintain distance from one another in democracy. The censorship-industrial complex shows an opposite instinct for all these groups to act in concert, essentially as one giant incestuous intelligence operation. Not of the people, but paternalistically for the people, or so they believe. Let's call it what it really is. And I'm editorializing here. This is fascism. This is straight up fascism. Coordinated fascism.
Oh my.
Narrative fascism coordinated across multiple media. Collusion.
Yep.
Journalists attend conferences where news happens and do not report it. Breaking ranks with neither with conference organizers nor with each other. Now there's a secret society. The Trump era has birthed a new brand of paranoid politics where once liberalizing institutions like the press and NGOs are encouraged to absorb into a larger whole, creating a single political cartel to protect against the contagion of mass movements. Somebody else referred to it on Twitter as the syndicate. As Lowenthal notes, this explains why so many anti-disinformation campaigns describe language as a kind of disease, e.g. infodemic, information pollution, and information disorder. Well, surrounded by the...
How dare you!
Yes, thank you, Greta. So surrounded by the disease of dangerous political ideas, checks and balances that are being discarded in favor of a new belief in banding together. And of course, fuck you, Guardian's Luke Harding. Unity, but not with these clowns. I don't want unity with Eoin Higgins and with Luke Harding and with David Lee and these idiots from the Guardian, these paid stooges, Ryan Grimm. Yeah, thank you. Guardian's Luke Harding laid this idea out a few years ago in a gushing review of a book about Bellingcat by its founder, douchebag jerk-off Elliot Higgins. Yes, I said douchebag jerk-off Elliot Higgins. Quote,
One more time.
douchebag jerk off Elliot Higgins. And a Tony Soprano.
Do we get a fourth?
Nope.
I got a third. I got a third. Can I get a fourth? Can I get a third?
Higgins
Third and a
thinks
half.
traditional news outlets, they need to establish their own open source investigation teams or miss out. And he's right. Several have done so. The New York Times has recruited ex-Bellingcat staff, which explains why they're such simps for the intel community. Higgins, of course, approves of this.
FBI, open up!
Yeah, fuck you. In his view, the rivalry between media titles is a thing of the past. The future is collaboration, the hunt for evidence, a shared endeavor, the truth out there if we wish to discover it. That sounds nice, kumbaya. The ICIJ is also part of that syndicate in my mind. Like, they're complete fucking feds. You know, it's just really interesting that they report on corruption and wrongdoing from every other country in the world except the one that they originated in here. And they've got like people from every coast investigating shit, but somehow they never find anything about any Americans doing stuff. Amazing.
No.
Luke Harding, piece of shit, made this sound cheery, but the rivalry of media titles is the primary, if not only, regulatory mechanism for keeping the press honest. If the Times, WAPO, CNN, and MSNBC no longer go after each other for uncorrected errors, like the Hamilton 68 fiasco exposed in the Twitter files, or Harding's own infamous report that former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort managed to have a secret meeting in the Ecuadorian embassy with the world's most watched human, Julian Assange, they can and will indulge in collective delusions, Russiagate being one of them.
Delusions.
A shared endeavor, vision of politics, is just a synonym for belief in elite concentration of power. Fascism. As noted in Lowenthal's thread, the story of the Twitter files and the censorship-industrial complex is really the story of the collapse of public trust in experts and institutions, because they're all bought, how those experts struck back by trying to pool their remaining influence into a political monopoly. The losers in any advancement of this story would include anyone outside the monopoly, and they can either be on the right or the left. Yeah, anyone not in the middle reporting on the narrative of the day is going to be thrown out. The intense negative reaction by traditional press to the Twitter file stories published to date is rooted in a feeling of betrayal. The new media leaders see themselves as doing the same service police officers in the stop and frisk era called order maintenance, pouncing on visible signs of discord or disruption. They don't want to sow discord. Well, they do, but their own way. They're gatekeepers. And the Twitter files, classic old-timey journalism that assumes the public has a right to know things, represents an unacceptable breach of the perimeter. Orff also today is releasing a video he compiled for the report on the censorship-industrial complex titled 11 Minutes of Media Falsehoods just on one subject, just on one channel. And it's what's left of a more ambitious plan the Racket team had tried to put together as part of this wider series, whose first pieces are coming out today. And of course, we know why he's not able to put out a wider version of the series, and that's because Elon Musk is a pussy-ass douchebag who doesn't like Substack and thought that Matt Taibbi was going to be an employee of theirs, even though he's not. And he doesn't like the fact that Matt has a Substack and didn't want to publish it Twitter, and therefore Matt doesn't get access to the Twitter files going for... Elon's a crybaby and a pussy and a
Great
simp for
success.
intel. Yes, thank you for that. Thanks, Bora. Just on one subject, just on one channel.
You're welcome.
It's an better, great success. My wife,
Great success.
my wife, she's
You're welcome.
upstairs.
Oh, very nice.
Very nice. But the Twitter files, unfortunately.
Very nice.
Yes, Andrew and Matt's material is coming out first, but in the next weeks, you'll be reading from a series of contributors in this report on the censorship-industrial complex, each looking at this subject from different angles. So we're going to have more Twitter files drops in the next couple of weeks, whether Elon likes it or not, because they gave these guys the material. So Matt said, I'm going to keep publishing this shit as long as I can and until I can run out of material to publish. So the project started with a question, who's on this list? So he prints this, and there's a longer table in the article.
Yeah, there's the
says,
video. Are you gonna roll the beautiful bean footage?
I'm not going to show the video.
Ah,
You can go to
darn
Orff's
it.
channel. It's 11 minutes long. It's freaking long as shit, but it's so good.
Yeah,
And it just shows
Yep.
And
It is good.
it shows a coordinated effort across the entire MSNBC network to spin this Russiagate narrative and use certain names and buzzwords and keywords and stoke that fear super high. But what Matt's saying is that you were looking there on the previous slide there of a page 7 of a report by the State Department Inspector General from August 2020 featuring the forgettable title, Audit of Global Engagement Center, Federal Assistance Award Management and Monitoring. Right, that means nothing. So on the first page, the state IG explained that it was auditing a new agency, the Global Engagement Center, which was housed in the State Department and dedicated to the fight against foreign, state, and non-state propaganda and disinformation. I think we found where NAFO sits. This is it.
Yep.
All right. The IG added some history and this was in 2020. Right. But in March 2016, Obama signed Executive Order 13721. Yeah. Thanks, Obama. All right, which required the Secretary of State to establish the GEC. The National Defense Authorization Act for financial year 2017 then mandated that GEC lead, synchronize, and coordinate efforts of the federal government to recognize, understand, expose, and counter foreign state and non-state propaganda and disinformation efforts aimed at undermining the United States national security interests. Wow, that sounds like it was a law specifically written against WikiLeaks. That's what that reads to me.
Yep.
The report went on to say that in fiscal year 2018, this new anti-disinformation wing of the State Department received $98.7 million, including approximately almost $80 million in congressionally approved appropriated funds and $20 million transferred from DOD. So now you've got the Defense Department and the military involved as well. That was distributed among 39 different award recipients whom the Inspector General was kind enough to list. Thank you very much. Only they redacted all but 3 names, none of which have what one would describe as a vibrant online presence today. ARC Advisors, the Democracy Council of California, and the CNA Corporation. He says, I first read this report in mid-January, roughly 3 months into the Twitter Files project, and at the time I was trying to learn more about Hamilton 68. So, again, there's this massive ocean of data that you have access to, and nobody gives you a guide, nobody tells you where to look, nobody tells you what to look for. You just have to start digging and probing and searching and going down rabbit holes and seeing where it takes you. So he starts learning more about Hamilton 68, purporting to track a list of accounts linked to, quote, Russian influence activities. We've talked about this before. Internal Twitter emails showed that executives reverse engineered the Hamilton list and found it to be a fraud, mostly tracking not Russians, but ordinary people here at home. I think we've definitely covered that. So multiple sources told him to look for Hamilton ties to the GEC. Among those who claimed to help design the site included a writer named J.M. Berger, who told me that he'd been on the GEC payroll until about a month before the list's launch, though he vigorously denied doing work on Hamilton for GEC. Hamilton's public spokesman, Clint Watts, who's a former FBI counterterrorism agent, he worked at GEC's predecessor agency, the CSCC, which is the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications. Not like it matters. The first head of the GEC, though, former Time editor Rick Stengel, lauded the Hamilton 68 project in odd language, saying that if only we'd had that during the election. What would they have done differently? They they would have had more people probably taken out that were questioning and that were calling Joe a racist rapist, which, well. So again, Richard Stengel touted on Morning Joe today, if only we'd had it during the election. And this was in 2017. So he was talking about 2016 having people booted out then. Trying to answer these questions about a relatively small amount of money and 39 names, I soon realized that the anti-disinformation world was awash with cash from a range of public and private sources. We weren't dealing with dozens of organizations, but at least hundreds, many engaged in language policing at scale. By early February, seeing that keeping track of which group did what was clearly too much work for one person to even begin to take on, and he put out an APB for help, mainly in trying to answer one question: how big is this new speech bureaucracy? And I remember him putting that out, and I think Crab actually volunteered to do some stuff. A couple of us raised our hands and were like, "You want any help looking at anything?
Yeah.
We're definitely down to take a look at that." Twitter Files reporters like Michael Schellenberger and Matt, of course, didn't have much of a hint of what they were looking at until later in the project, but that larger story was about a new type of political control mechanism that didn't really exist 10 years ago. So in preparation for testimony before the House in March, Schellenberger gave it a name, the Censorship-Industrial Complex, which we've been referring to it as, right? So the allusion was an unpleasantly perfect fit, because America was introduced to the original military-industrial complex on January 17th, 1961.
17.
Right, which is in the farewell address of Eisenhower. The former commander of Allied forces in Europe in World War II warned of something new in the American experience, an interlocking network of financiers, extra-governmental organizations, and official bureaucracies who were organized around the permanent arms production and who collectively wielded more power than kings, presidents, and other such titular authorities. Tell me how that's any different today. It's not. It's only grown.
Same.
It's actually absorbed the intel community on top of it. Ike forced Americans for the first time to think of power as suffuse, insuperable, and geographically indistinct, less like a king's scepter than electricity running through a brain. In the context of the military-industrial complex, the Oval Office from which Eisenhower delivered his famous farewell was just a room. Eisenhower himself just a recoiling pile of bones and fluid, following a final stage direction. And he plays the thing. I'm not going to play the video. Everybody, I think a lot of people have seen this
macabre.
Video. It is. But the censorship-industrial complex is much the same. Schellenberger coined the term while working with me on a Twitter Files project that began with a parallel mystery story. Who had the power to muzzle a president? We didn't understand at the time, but the third, fourth, and fifth installments of the Twitter Files
they're dominatrix, but they don't talk about them.
Well, that's that's putting the ball with the thing. Like I'm thinking Pulp Fiction and Ving Rhames.
Right. Yeah, a little bit of pup play.
Right. The 3 days of infighting at Twitter between the Capitol riots on January 6th and their decision to remove Donald Trump on January 8th served as an introduction for all of us to the major components of a vast new public-private speech bureaucracy, one that appeared to have been founded in the United States but was clearly global in scope. It also, and I've got to point this out, stop right here, this is still a limited hangout because this is still what was only vetted and allowed by Twitter's legal team. Don't forget this. People forget, and they act like this was all we saw. No, this is all they let us see, and it's still fucking terrible. The material you'll be reading in the next week or so is designed to accomplish two things. The first task we settled on was to create, through interactive lists and other features, a quantitative map of the world that Schellenberger described in his written testimony, a censorship-industrial complex. That does what? Combines established methods of psychological manipulation with highly sophisticated tools from computer science, including AI. The complex's leaders are driven by the fear that the internet and social media platforms empower populist, alternative, and fringe personalities and views which they regard as destabilizing.
Fringe.
They're going to turn the frogs gay. But that's also us. That's
Frogs
also
gay.
Jimmy Dore. That's also Revolutionary Blackout Network. That's
Jimmy
also,
Dore.
Yes. Jimmy Dore.
RBN. The Illuminati. The New World Order.
The Young Turks.
They're lizard people.
Who were lumped in somehow with us still by Alex Jones. But in the pursuit of this first goal, organized loosely around a thing we've been calling the list, Racket welcomed people like Alan Lowenthal, like Lowenthal and Genevieve Campbell, who was formerly of the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard. So with their experience in the anti-disinformation space, Andrew and Genevieve have helped a team of journalists and researchers put together what we hope will be an accessible starter kit for everyday readers hoping to acquaint themselves with the biggest organizational names in the CIC. And that's the censorship-industrial complex. Right? So
yes.
The second goal had reporters like Aaron Mate, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Susan Schmidt.
Aaron Mate.
The Hunt for Tom Clancy writer Matt Farwell, who's a co-worker of his late colleague Michael Hastings. Military veteran turned reporter Tom Wyatt. The wonderfully obsessive Racket contributor Orf, I know that guy. and others attempt to tell the broader history of the new internal censorship phenomenon. Each took on different stories under the theme of the CIC, aided by leads from the Twitter files, like what was the genesis of the Senate Intelligence Committee's Trump-Russia investigation? How did the post 9/11 counterterrorism project morph into a post-Trump counter-populism project?
That's what Taibbi said he was working through too, right? Where it's like we go from the government down,
right?
Like
how does
it connect to Twitter?
Right. Yeah, how does the development of the CIC fit with the broader history of American information operations? Is this part of an ongoing CIA type of thing? InQtel, for example.
Absolutely.
I'd love to have Max Blumenthal report on some of this stuff, to be honest. You know, I'm sure he's helping Aaron.
Yes, sir.
Does a CIC that claims to stop fake news actually create it? Spoiler, it does. And if so, how many media stories need retracting, or at least an editor's note, in the face of information found in the Twitter files? Lastly, can the CIC target individuals? Yes, they can. And if so, what would one particularly devastating test case look like? Read. These stories will be coming out in the next weeks. I can't wait to see which account they're gonna showcase as being persecuted by Twitter. And first, probably suggested by the government, that they take a look at this. Twitter looks at it, puts it on a list, starts filtering it. The account starts whining about it, complaining about it, noticing what's happening, and nothing gets fixed. All the contributors to this report are independent. Oh, thank you, Matt. I love you, Matt. Many are not formally trained journalists, and some, like the tireless techno_bog, represent a new kind of citizen journalism it seemed important to recognize. A major subtext of the CIC story is that ordinary people are going to have to build their own media and oversight institutions to represent them, as virtually the entire landscape of traditional institutional checks on power seem to have been compromised. All of corporate media is owned, bought, and paid for. That's what Matt just said right there.
All
of it.
All, you say? You sure not like all?
Write down to Breaking Points, the Young Turks, and their whole satellite and network.
Damn.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
The Intercept,
like
too.
All of them? Damn.
If the military-industrial complex was propped up by an iron triangle of donors, Congress, and quasi-private interest groups, the CIC is more like a four-legged animal. Government, civil society organizations, tech companies, and a shocking fourth partner, news media. Stanford's Election Integrity Project, a supposedly independent group that director Alex Stamos said was created in 2020 to fill the gap of what government couldn't do by itself, did us the favor of creating a graphic representation of these four major stakeholders. And here it is. You've got government, civil society, the platforms, that's the tech companies, and then the media. And then the EIP website, which then is supposed to be the filter for all of this. The EIP wants to be the nanny state. All right, so they're pushing all this data from media, from civil society, and from government into the intake queue, along with proactive detection. That sounds fucking frightening as shit. Into a tier 1.
Can someone redo this in crayon? Like maybe. On a restaurant sheet?
Intake team. Yeah, that'd be funny.
I can understand it.
Crab. So this goes to a tier 1 intake team, which has on-call data gathering, triage, and response, then pushes stuff that they process into an analyst queue, which does more investigation and analysis, and a skilled analyst team maps the network and provides attribution. They then push that to an outcomes queue, which then goes back out,
which then goes to all the other
website
ones, right?
And everybody else. Correct.
I mean, this is like what's his name talked about in the 60s. What's that video that Jimmy shows where he's talking about like, hey, we just talk to journalists. We give them some stories.
Stockwell.
Some are good, some are bad.
John Stockwell.
Yep.
So,
I believe so. Yeah.
So that's this.
Looking like a hippie, straight up.
Yep. Note the way the reports flow both to and from the media, which has completely rethought its role vis-a-vis the public. Over and over in the Twitter files, we saw newspapers thinking on their own readers instead of advocating for them. The typical progression involved a civil society organization like the Britain-based Center for Countering Digital Hate, reaching out to reporters with lists of people or accounts deemed to be bad actors, followed by queries from those reporters to Twitter demanding to know, why hasn't this group been deleted? These voices? This idea? One of the first observations that Andrew made when he first started looking through the files was how bizarre it was to see civil society organizations holding tabletop exercises about election security with representatives of the military. Not the military is what civil society is supposed to mean. They're not supposed to be partners.
Partners.
Democracy relies on the dynamic tension between liberalizing institutions like the press, NGOs, and the media, but the CIC seeks to unite these groups and homogenize information flow. This is not only morally wrong, but ridiculous. There's no way to keep a cap on 8 billion voices forever. Enter James O'Keefe. The people you'll be reading about in this series want to try, however. How? Raw numbers, money, the sheer application of political will and computing power. And as you'll read and see, if they have to build one NGO for every human on Earth, they'll do it. Kafka dreamed up the one gatekeeper per person idea over a century ago as an ironic metaphor in Before the Law. But the modern United States is moving in that direction as a political reality. Like we're all the Truman Show. It's the ultimate convergence of the huge-scale waste approach to governance as perfected across generations of forever
thing at the end of
wars.
Batman.
Right, and exactly, and Pentagon spending, and the authoritarian thinking that flowered all over in responses like episodes like 9/11, Brexit, and the election of Donald Trump. I mean, the concept is too much democracy and freedom leads to mischief, and since the desire for these things can't be stamped out all at once, but instead must be squashed in every person all and over endlessly, the job requires a massive investment and a gigantic bureaucracy to match. How gigantic? Well, read on, starting with today's threads and Matt's mind-boggling video, and stay tuned to this space for more. As somebody we don't like says, watch this space. Actually, I realize that the whispering doesn't go, watch this space. Otherwise, it doesn't come out on the video. So, as our friend Misty always likes to say,
fucked.
Yeah, we're fucked. They control the narrative. They control the gateways. They control all the levers of power. They control the visibility filters. This segment wants me to watch Reds. That's great. Yeah, that was a really good article by Matt. And then read the Lowenthal article also. I was going to go through them, but that would be like another half hour, 40 minutes between Orf's article. And he did write a good article on top of the video that he produced that's almost 12 minutes long of MSNBC just repeating talking points nonstop. By the way, we got some nice merch at independentleft.shop. Pick up some merch. Lucy put up a picture this week of her wearing one of the INN tank tops. That's actually at innmerch.com. You can go to innmerch.com. You can get to our shop, and you can get to the INN shop as well as the Big Mad Crab shop. He's got some merch over there. Hook Big Mad Crab up.